Recording started.
Talk show. Recorded live.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation or around the world. Once again, you are listening to the VMware Communities Roundtable podcast. This is podcast number 539. My name is Eric Nilsson, and with me today I have my regular co-host, Matt Longeth. Today is Friday, January 22nd, 2021. Matt, how you doing today?
Eric, I have to say I'm a little sad. You know, you wake up, you think you make some improvements to the home lab, you put a brisket on the grill so that it's ready for the weekend, and you think you get some things accomplished and whatnot. And then you look at our guest, right? He's a blogger. He's obviously a prolific article with the vRealize Network Insight Cookbook. He's helped out so much here with our vExpert program. And then I look down at my Stream Deck and remind myself that he did a plugin for the Stream Deck with all that I use every day for Zoom. So you just think you do enough in the day, and then you see someone like our guest that really takes it up to the next level. And I'm sure we'll get up to all of that here soon enough. But how are you, sir? How are things out there? And what's the color of the bay?
So you're saying that you have tech envy, right? You're like jealous of Martin's, productivity, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, just general productivity. It's just like, man, the amount of content and just overall goodness that Martijn puts out into the community, I'm just really envious of.
Actually, we'll get to our guest in a second. I would say that Martijn Smit actually cloned himself a few years ago, and so there's actually like 17 of him running around at any given time, so don't be fooled. He's not that productive. Just got a lot of them. Today on the show, we're going to be talking to Martijn Smit on a great topic, which was VMware Smart NIC, or the industry Smart NIC, where it is all about Smart NIC. And then we have Project Monterey, and Martin's done a great blog. But before we get to that, I'll tell you, it has been windy and rainy here. Everything in my backyard flipped upside down. All my bicycles blew over. It has been super windy. I think it's heading across America. So a lot of crazy weather going on, and we've had power outages and general stormy weather in California. So the bay is super dark and muddy and choppy. It's been kicked up. We've just had a lot of wind going on. And speaking of that and the lack of power, maybe we should still say hello to Martijn. And Martijn, I know that you've had some power challenges of your own this week.
Yes, I did. There was a massive explosion at one of my distribution centers, like in the district. And right now I'm happy to have lights and things and be able to talk to you, but there's a noisy generator just down the street to make that happen.
Wow. That's super cool. Power in a box. I think you said that they brought in like a shipping container and then spun up power for the neighborhood.
Yeah. It's like a regular container, but it's just like there's a generator inside. It's making a lot of noise. Luckily you cannot hear it, but the next door neighbors are definitely losing some sleep, I think. But yeah, power in a box, kind of cool.
That's kind of cool. All right. So before we get to the show, which is obviously we're running on Friday because you didn't have any power on Wednesday. So sorry to everybody that was expecting to hear us live. We're doing it Friday morning because now you have power in a box. News that's going on at VMware. I don't know if I have any news, Matt. I've asked what's the deal with Pat Gelsinger and that. They haven't heard any updates. They're just moving forward with looking for a new CEO, and I think and then there was going to be a VMworld announcement because Pat is moving on to Intel. I think they're pausing to make the announcement on key dates for VMworld as they try to settle out what's happening with our new CEO, if we're going to have one, and what's their availability. From a news perspective, I don't know if there's been much else.
vExpert applications have finally wrapped. The voting is in progress, and I believe that we're scheduled to do announcements here right before Valentine's Day. So for our international listeners, they're the February 14th. that we should have an announcement in and around that time frame. So thank you for those that have applied, and we're moving forward with all of that. As we have previously discussed, any previous vExpert from last year, we're given the situation with COVID, if you were awarded that designation in 2020, you will carry that designation for 2021, and we will be reviewing net new applicants for the designation for 2021.
Excellent. Very nice. Good job to all the vExpert pros and everybody that's processing the apps. I really appreciate that. Okay. Moving on from news to our guest. Our guest, Martijn Smit, has been on our show multiple times talking about, networking. And Matt, you gave him a good introduction. So I'll just run over to Martijn. Martijn, why don't you give us the 1-minute elevator pitch? How long you've been at working in the VMware ecosystem, and what do you work on?
Sure. So my name is Martijn. I have been working in IT for quite a long time. Honestly, too long to remember. It's over 18, 19 years or something like that. Same with VMware. I started at GSX 2. Something. So that's been there for a while. I'm currently working at VMware at the mothership, as I'd like to call it, for about 4.5 years now. Yeah, and I used to be in a networking system solutions engineer, and now I'm in the technical marketing team for Realized Network Insight. But basically, everything is still revolving around networking, because that still makes the internet happen, and that intrigues me the most part of it. And one of the most subjects that's not gotten enough attention is monitoring and analytics and troubleshooting. Hence, that I'm working with Realized Network Insight.
Nice. All right, and then today we're going to be talking about the blog article that you came out with, which is Smart NICs. And so we always start with from an industry perspective. Why don't you tell us the history? Kind of, I read your blog a little bit. Amazon and Amazon doing AWS, they were involved with why don't you explain Smart NIC concepts and how it got started? Then we'll get into Project Monterey and what VMware is doing in it, and then we'll wrap up. So, why don't you start us out with what is this concept?
Yeah, sure. So basically, one of the things that I also want to set straight, and I did not provide enough history in that blog article, and I'm trying to revamp it to include that history. But Smart NICs have been around for a very, very long time. I've even found references back to the 1999s. So for a pretty long time. I used to use them with a company that I was working for, a service internet provider, where we had back in 2012, where we were using these Smart NICs in order to optimize the streaming services that we had. But basically, if just in a nutshell, a Smart NIC is a computer on the actual network interface. Instead of plugging a NIC into your server and then exposing that NIC to your OS, so you would have either vSphere or just Linux or Windows running on it, the NIC translates into a NIC on that OS, right? That's what we used to. The Smart NIC is basically a way to segregate that. So you have this NIC, you put it in a server, you plug in cables, but after that, the Smart NIC is the first hop, if you will. So the ports go into the Smart NIC, and then you can decide what happens to the traffic, what happens to the network topology before you present it to the OS. So it's essentially a way of virtualizing your network card with the same benefits that you would have if you were to virtualize a server. I mean, you can segregate traffic and connections between different parts of the OS. You can implement security, just like VMware has done with NSX and micro-segmentation and all that. But that moves towards the NIC itself instead of the OS. So it's kind of an extra security enclave that prevents outside people to coming into the US. Yeah, that's pretty much in a nutshell what it is.
I have a question, technical question, as long as we're just in the
Please.
context here, which is, what's the CPU that they're putting? Are they putting like an ARM CPU there? What are they actually running as a CPU on the NIC itself?
There are different variations, but the ones that you basically see in the news right now are mostly ARM based. But I mean, ARM is really getting powerful, right? If you look at the Raspberry Pis that are out there, and the fact that you can run VMware on Pis now as well, is pretty cool, and they're pretty performant as well. I mean, the amount of CPU cycles that you can grab out of these ARM CPUs are pretty big. But that's one form, but there are a lot of vendors out there that are doing different things. There are also FPGA based, so basically like the same CPUs as you would find on a GPU.
Right.
Those are there as well.
Okay,
I don't think there are any x86 ones, but ARM is pretty much the most ones.
Right, which kind of defines the smart device market anyway. That nowadays, if you have a smart device, it's usually got an ARM chip on it, and it's got a little OS on it, and it's smart, right? So, what OS are they running? Like a typical.
Pretty much the vendor-based OS. So right now, and that's also pretty cool about the Project Monterey, but we'll get into that later. But right now, if you buy a SmartNIC, you just get the OS from the vendor where you buy it. So if you buy an Intel one, or a Broadcom one, or a Mellanox one, you would get the OS from that vendor itself, which has its benefits and its like pros and cons. Because some vendors have more software than the others. The other ones have more performance than the others. So you would have to look at what do you want to do and what fits my use cases the most. So for example, VMware has done an agreement with Pensando. Yeah, I think I said that right. Which is a vendor that has their own OS, and to me, that's the most elaborate one that they've got. That's out there. They do all kinds of networking things.
All right, so that's kind of defining the architecture here. We've got a board, we got an ARM chip on it, we got obviously Ethernet chips or whatever the chipsets are that are doing the networking. They're all connected together. The vendor gives you an operating system there, and all of a sudden now, or a mini operating system, and now you have a SmartNIC. Then you got a management interface, I guess, that you would have to then talk to that SmartNIC and then do the configurations and so forth. Is there any kind of standards in how you're interacting with the SmartNIC to do the configurations?
There are. I've just not seen that executed very well. So that there are some standards in the IETF that can be followed to implement those things, like API-based communication and conversation towards those SmartNICs. But typically, you also get a management suite with these SmartNICs. So, for example, Pensando has one of these management suites where you can just configure all the networking settings and all the security settings that you want to do on your fleet of SmartNICs. Think of it like you get a vCenter with your SmartNICs to manage all of them.
Right. All right, that makes sense, right? And understand that. So then with that, maybe we should talk a little bit about the challenges and why VMware is stepping into this space, right? So,
yeah, and I think the previous things that we mentioned, that we talked about, is exactly why VMware is stepping into this place and should step into this space. Is because of the management. Like, just bear with me a little bit. Before VMware, before ESXi, we had like all of these different servers and all of the different OSs that had different management tools and different UIs and everything like that, right? So a system administrator had to know a lot of different OSs, a lot of different ways to configure things, etc. Then vSphere came along, unified or universalized, if that's a word, the management plane for that compute environment, right? So you would just have a vSphere cluster, put in the VMs, and then deliver the VMs to your application admins or whoever. That same premise is exactly what I see Project Monterey or VMware being able to bring to this space. Because there are so many of the SmartNIC vendors, there are a lot of different ways to manage them and a lot of different ways to configure them, and a lot of different features as well. Different vendors have different features, but VMware is, I think, the one that actually can bring that together and just make a vCenter for those SmartNICs and allow you to really easily manage them.
Martijn, prior to Monterey, let's say I had a SmartNIC that from one of these vendors in a 6.7 cluster. Could I pass those services along to a VM? Was that something that was supported?
There was one option to do pass-through. Basically, what you get is a SmartNIC provides vNICs, basically, virtual NICs to the OS. That becomes your VM NICs inside a vSphere host. And then you can also use the pass-through mechanism inside vSphere to pass that along to the VM itself. It's gonna be a lot of conversion and a lot of hard
overhead
work to get that sorted out to give every single VM their own vNIC. I mean, yeah, that's going to be very hard if you don't have that universal management plane in place.
And you would be limited to just VMs on that particular host, would you not?
Yeah. Basically, what you would have to have is like a universal configuration that has every single SmartNIC to configure the same way, and that whenever a VM vMotion somewhere else, the configuration needs to be present there as well. So yeah, that's going to be a lot of overhead, I think.
So how to go back to Monterey? How does now that change? Or now are we transitioning to how now are we more virtualizing that interface of how it's presented to the individual VMs?
Yeah, let me first draw the disclaimer that I'm not in the Monterey team, so I'm kind of doing the wishful thinking exercise here. But basically, what Kit Colbert announced with Project Monterey is that we're going to get vSphere and NSX on top of these SmartNICs.
It's just all. I mean, at some point, it's all containerized, right? So
yeah.
It's a containerized workload that we just shift over to that ARM chip.
Yeah, and personally, I'm not that convinced about the vSphere use case, but I'm very, very excited about the NSX use case because that solves the entire management with different vendors, and so it doesn't matter which SmartNIC you buy anymore. In that case, it'll just work because NSX will work on those different SmartNICs. But basically, what they're trying to do is if you insert NSX as a sort of a module within one of these SmartNICs, you can have the SmartNIC redirect certain traffic towards NSX. So whether that be the overlay network that we also know already with NSX and being able to create those logical networks and separating them within VXLAN and Geneve. So that type of traffic would be redirected to the NSX module, if you will, so that NSX can do the logical networking already inside the SmartNIC instead of having to do that on the OS. So that's offloading basically. So you don't have to bother the host CPU with that anymore. You can just have the SmartNIC do that.
So when you say the OS, are we looking at kernel is at the hypervisor that we're extracting that from, or OS at the VM level, or potentially both?
Potentially both, yeah. So if you do pass through, then it's the VM. But if it's like a regular quote unquote environment, feature environment, then the NSX part will not have to be running on the kernel inside the hypervisor anymore, because that's taken care of before it actually even enters the hypervisor, which also means that the hypervisor will become more secure because you have that security enclave before. And I also think that that's like the major use case that will make this make the SmartNICs what it will become. So security, right? Right now, NSX network virtualization, every single network virtualization technology does it in the hypervisor kernel, meaning that the traffic has to come to the hypervisor. If it can come to the hypervisor,
It makes it vulnerable.
Yeah, sometimes you can hack it if the kernel is not properly, or if there's some vulnerability being discovered, which unfortunately sometimes still happens. But if you can do that security, if you can use that security enclave to prevent the traffic coming even into the hypervisor, and there's just putting down a firewall inside the SmartNIC instead of the hypervisor, you would have an extra protection layer there. You would potentially be, and I know this is quite a controversial term, but you would potentially be able to air gap your hypervisor from the rest of the network.
Yeah, it's really not east-west. It's not north-south. It's intra. Yeah. It's OS to hypervisor. It's a whole new level of walled garden or enclave. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's PCI bus traffic, if you will. But yeah, so if you have that security in place, then you can make a lot of things more secure. And if you have NSX doing that security for you, like the management of NSX, you would be able to go into like a vCenter and or NSX Manager itself and just configure the security settings for all of your SmartNICs via NSX, and then have it in the same plane as your VM security, as your cloud security with NSX Cloud, the container stuff that NSX does. Just have everything centralized, management-wise, of course.
And then I maybe this is the time to transition, but once that you're now at that level of analysis and now knowing where all of the traffic goes from even outside of the hypervisor level, what additional resources does that give something like Verni, vRealize Network Insights, to allow machine learning, AI, other additional security sets now that we have that extra level of analysis of what the network traffic is?
Yeah, and that's a very exciting topic as well. So most of the SmartNIC vendors already have very significant visibility into the traffic that goes through those NICs. They essentially do deep packet inspection on all of the traffic that goes through it, and do it on such a way that it's actually line rate. So if you have a 40 gig NIC, you can push 40 gig traffic through it and have the deep packet inspection. I mean, there's going to be some differences here or there depending on what kind of net traffic it goes through, but it's ingrained into the programming of the SmartNIC to get that visibility in there, meaning that you can grab that visibility. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm lobbying for a proof of concept with SmartNICs and VRNI to be able to use that deep insights and then just put that into VRNI and also allow you to show the traffic and analyze the traffic there. But basically, you have an unlimited feed of the traffic that goes through it, and you don't have to push it through an agent or a worker VM or like a different type of appliance in order to get that visibility, which we have to do right now, unfortunately. So yeah, that opens up a whole new world of being able to see what actually happens with that traffic.
I see from your blog article, and again, we've talked and mentioned about this blog article, but it's available over in your domain, lostdomain.org. And we talked about the Pensando brand, and those you had called out specifically 2 cards, and even at the lesser of the 2 cards was 50 gig L4 stateful with 2 million routes at only 20 watts. I mean, that's just absolutely incredible. I mean, I could think of, not too long ago where that was chassis backplane core switches type throughput, and now it's in a SmartNIC.
Yep. I used to manage those things. They were pretty much 30 U high in a rack, right? So almost as high as
big
myself.
soup engines. It sounded like an aircraft carrier when it was starting up, and huge power draws.
Needed a couple more of these generator containers to actually run it instead of it's ridiculous how quick we've gone from like massive boxes into one of these small chips.
That's one of the things that I want to address. And I know I'm kind of a novice when it comes to networking, but it's kind of like, all right, we had Cisco switches, we had these big switches, we had iOS running on them, which gave you all the capability that, that you could have. Then we kind of moved into just do it in NICs in your box, right? And now it's kind of like, well, a smart NIC basically is one of these things just on a card, right? That you could have had a 1U and put it there with power on it, and it would still be a smart NIC. It just wouldn't be connected to the PCI bus or whatever your interface is to your CPU. But fundamentally, this is just like a full operating switch that plugs into your PCI bus now, and you have an operating system, you have a CPU on it, and now we're talking about putting ESX over there so that we can run NSX. But fundamentally, I could put that thing in a little black case and put it in a rack, because it's really a fully functioning switch, right?
Yep. Even a lot more than that. I mean, it can do load balancing, it can do firewalling, it could do routing, basically a lot more than those big switches that we used to have, Matt.
Right. But savings that it ends up in my server plugged into the power bus, and then talks to my CPU. But now I have separation between the operating system environment and virtualization environment, everything that's running in my server, and what's running on this little switch that's now plugged into my server, right? And so a fully separate environment. And now, we're going to run ESX on it so that we can then run an NSX payload on top of that, and then have that full functioning NSX switch as a NIC card.
Yeah, and it also has like a very good reason, right? Like before we moved the networking functions into the x86 boxes, we had it on specialized ASICs, so like the chips that are on the switchboards, basically. That those ASICs were function built for just switching traffic or routing traffic. So we moved that into the servers. To make it more flexible, primarily. So we wanted to be able to do virtual networking, firewalling, just by using NSX or something. But that kind of switched us from using purpose-built ASICs for a couple of functions into a general purpose-built CPU, meaning that certain functions did slow down. I mean, if you were a streaming vendor that went from hardware networking to software networking, you would see a small degradation in performance. I mean, you go from purpose built to general build, so yeah, that's gonna happen. And now we're actually moving forward and combining the two. So combining a general purpose software, so software that can do anything, but doing that on a purpose-built chip, and the ASICs inside those smart NICs are purposely built for networking. meaning that we get the flexibility of the software approach that we did with the virtual networking trend, but we get the performance of the good old days, if you will.
That makes sense. Yeah, I could see that. Right. Yep. So it's kind of bringing them both together and then allowing that in a box, plug into a server. So we're talking VMware's doing this with this one vendor. Do we expect the industry to do more of this? Like, will there be other vendors? And then, we can't say what VMware is going to do, but I would assume that this will turn into an industry that this approach can be done with multiple vendors, NICs.
Oh yeah, I fully expect. Like I called out Pensando, Kit Colbert.
What Melonix has one that's compatible right now, at least some of the reference architecture that's been out there for the project.
Yeah, so it's just like getting a slow start and working closely with like one or two vendors, getting the architecture in place, getting it working. I mean, I've not seen a demo yet, so I'm not sure if it's actually working already. And then once that's in place, then just treat it like the hardware compatibility list that we did with VMware. Just chugging along with adding all of the vendors, testing them, see if everything works, and then just get a massive list of vendors where you can run NSX or VMware or how it ever ends up calling.
Martijn, you had brought this up earlier, and I think I will say that my understanding of this is limited, and it's a progressing topic, but the idea that we could run vCenter or vCenter-like services on these smart NICs, and you said that you were a little concerned about what the use case might be there, or your understanding what the use case. I have some thoughts and ideas of upgrades and robo use cases and whatnot, but what's your take on that? How would you might see this being extended now that we can use this ARM platform, and with these services being containerized, what other workloads outside of networking services can we start to expect to maybe think about putting on these smart NICs now that it's an ARM-based platform? And Eric, I'd open that up to you. I mean, what else can we expect to see now? And it's ARM at its core, right? And we have ESXi now on ARM. What other workloads can we see potentially put onto these NICs?
So when it comes to those workloads, I don't think we will really be seeing anything other than networking related ones. So one example that I do have, which is back in 2012, I had my first interaction with a smart NIC, and the reason why is because we wanted to speed up those streaming services that I talked about. So what we actually did is we put a small piece of software inside the kernel of that smart NIC. So it was like just installing something on the smart NIC that would serve the stream outside. So a user would connect to that server, and the smart NIC would serve up the actual stream that we wanted to show them. So I would imagine those types of use case being done on those smart NICs when you start to virtualize them and turn it into a hypervisor. But the reason why I'm kind of skeptical is because those are like the only use cases that I see. And I am probably missing something. I mean, it's progressing. My imagination is also limited. So there's probably gonna be organizations that's gonna prove me wrong. I'm just curious what you would want to do on a purpose-built NIC that's not networking related, and not put that on the general CPU.
So a couple thoughts in this space. One, I think that we need Martijn number 12, because he knows a lot more about this space than I think you're Martijn number 8 here. So it's hard to know which Martijn we're actually working with. But,
we need to make the API call to the right Martijn.
Right, Martijn, to get that answer right.
Let me talk myself.
A couple ideas when we start talking about, obviously, firewall and the firewall logic that can be pushed out there, but that's just part of NSX. But that's a market that, that's obviously going to run there, right? And we manage that. But then if you go up the stack a little bit, maybe container networking services. So maybe when you get into complex microservices and the connections between those, maybe there's something that we can do there. And then it gets one level up, which is service mesh, right? And like service mesh management, like what are you doing? So some of this core functionality might get pushed to the outside, to the NIC, right, to manage traffic or manage connections between services before they end up in your CPU. But I tend to agree with you, Martijn. It's not like there's a large number of things we're going to be doing with these things other than really networking functionality to connect services, maybe.
Yeah, and I mean the resources on these smart NICs are not unlimited, right? I mean they are quite small. Think of it as a Raspberry Pi. I think the largest one that I've seen had 24 gigs of memory, and maybe a dual core CPU. So you don't want to put everything on it. And like your example with service mesh is pretty interesting, because I was like, maybe yes, maybe no. And mostly because you would run the actual applications on the regular CPU, but then if you were to run the connection on the smart NIC, you would create basically a hairpin between the regular CPU and the smart NIC CPU to have that connection being established. So it would depend on how quick that's going to be. But I would definitely like to see numbers for that type of thing. But I need to get a smart NIC on my in my lab first.
Yeah. So I think that conversation, Matt, to answer your question, is no, probably not a lot of crazy stuff. Just they're smart NICs. They're going to be smart NICs, right? But then managing and then dumping NSX there and letting NSX run on the smart NIC, there's advantages there, and that's the big move here, right? Less about, I think ESX is really about just running NSX. To your point, Martijn, like that's why we did that, right? And it's easy to put there. Right.
So if you wanted to use it, and again, I have no knowledge of this, and someone could say this is absolutely wrong. It's for conversation at this point. But let's say if we wanted to stage an upgrade for a vSAN witness, we have it running on it. We're now distributing these NICs potentially all over the place because we can get near wireline speed. So in a robo use case, you could potentially see where you would have a redundancy for that vSAN witness. Obviously, we can do it now on ESXi on ARM, where we've seen that now, where we can run that vSAN witness on a Raspberry Pi. Could we shift it over temporarily to the NIC if we need to upgrade the primary witness so we don't lose redundancy? I don't know. It's a concept. And then can you scale that in temporary use cases where you could do something like vCenter? Because you could see vCenter running on ARM on smaller size, like small deployment edge use cases for vCenter. Maybe. I have no idea. I'm throwing it out there.
No, it is an interesting one. I would say the vSAN witness. I'm not entirely sure on the top of my head how much resources that takes up, but I would actually say just put a vSAN witness on every smart NIC if you have like one of those robo things. The primary use case is to detect whether the server fails. And honestly, if you have redundant power supplies and that actually are two different power feeds, the primary thing that would fail is the OS, so VMware or something, or the storage controller. If those components fail, you would still have the smart NIC and the witness to be able to detect what's going on. So I would say that might be a good one. Yeah.
Now the other thing that throws into this is like, this is just the early days of this, right? And every 2 years, CPUs get twice as fast. I could just see where over time, this will grow into the smart NIC is just another compute resource in the fabric of all the compute capability you have, and the performance issues will go away because every year it doubles. Pretty soon you're going to put the whole universe's payload on one small chip somewhere. But so it could grow, right? Like the use cases will grow as as the CPU memory and capability of ARM chip grows. But then how much do you want to pay for this functionality, because everything costs money, right? So but I can see that if you would ask somebody this 5 years ago, they'd be like, no, you're not going to ever do this. But now we have little ARM CPUs that can do it, and you can do it, and pretty soon the fabric is going to be ubiquitous.
Yeah, and I also think that like the benefits of these types of things get proven out by the hyperscalers, the companies like AWS, and mostly because AWS has
where a
been
lot of
using
it
it.
started, right? Where
Yeah.
the industry has started to progress. The big
Yeah.
ones, AWS, Azure, whatnot, even GCP in some instances where they were doing their own hardware builds.
Yeah, AWS actually acquired a company called Annapurna, I think I want to say, back in 2016. And Annapurna is the company that made the specialized ASICs. I think it was based out of Israel. They made the chips that they're basically running their SmartNICs on. And a year later, they started pushing them out to their own fleet. Like maybe you've heard of AWS Nitro, which is their concept of a networking hypervisor that runs on their SmartNICs. And it basically means that they already do their security and their networking inside their SmartNIC fleet, and they've done a really good job scaling that. And the use case and the actual SmartNIC has proven itself with AWS, I would say. As you mentioned, Azure also uses it. They started using it to optimize the Bing performance. Not that anyone uses that, but they're using it also for network virtualization now in like regular Azure. So it's spreading out, and once the hyperscalers start doing it, then you can see that some of these things trickle down to the enterprises. It'll take a while. I mean, we have to have the management in place. We have to have the hardware in place. It needs to get cheaper. That's a big thing because they're pretty expensive right now. If you go to
what's list on even one of the smaller cards? I have no idea.
It's about 12K average, I think, per NIC. Well, that's like 4 times as much as a regular one, I think. So that needs to go down.
What can that do as far as your consolidation, or in both a couple of things? I'm imagining now that we can start to offload workload from the CPU, where we can have now a higher consolidation even within the same CPU family, right? So what is there to say for density now for being able to on that 12K spend?
Yeah, it would increase. I mean, you're offloading functions from the general CPU towards a different CPU. You're increasing your CPU rates essentially by adding that specialized CPU. But right now, if you really wanted to make the business case, I don't think you would like really break even. You would pay more for the SmartNIC. So, but I would say let the hyperscalers buy a lot of them for now. Let them make it faster, quicker. Like in a couple of years, it's double in speed. And once that happens and that trend, then it'll start to come down in price and will be accessible to more and more people. And then also the good part is that if VMware finishes Project Monterey in time, then once the price gets reasonable, then we would also have the management software to work it.
All right, I can see that. I can definitely see that. All right, going through your article, storage implementations. I don't think we've talked anything about that. Let's see, vSAN, network through vSAN. I don't know if there's worthwhile talking about any of that. A distributed storage system, you talk a little bit about that. What do we need to know about distributed storage systems? And then you go the HCI mesh. Take a moment. Why is that in your blog article?
Well, because the SmartNICs also perform the task of storage controllers, or are able to, at least. So anyone familiar with like the CNA, the converged network Ethernet adapters, that means that you would have fiber channel over Ethernet and Ethernet in just one port. Just like Cisco UCS used to do. They do it with their systems. I used to do Cisco UCS, not anymore, but so it's the functions are there. The software is also there to be able to do storage over Ethernet towards the SmartNIC and then present it as a raw volume to the OS. So the OS thinks that it just has a hard disk plugged in, but it actually is a SOM somewhere down the racks. So that's there already. And the reason why that's also probably going to be important is because there is also purpose-built features in those ASICs for the storage. So it's a lot quicker than you would put in your own NICs and then doing storage over the network. I don't have like exact percentages of that, how much quicker that is, but I've been told that it's really significantly faster in the sense of processing the storage I/O, and then the OS just doesn't have to bother with it because it thinks it has a disk attached to it, to the storage controller.
We need that wireline speed in some instances, right? So depending on what's on the back end. So I think you had pointed this out in your blog, like in more advanced technologies like NVMe over Fabric, where you need that near wireline speed. I'm sure that this is going to help to facilitate that.
Yep. I like in the major storage consuming enterprises, you would see racks and stacks of the fastest storage that you can imagine plugged into. Right now, they're pretty much using RDMA OE also over Ethernet, just to make the ability to access that storage a lot quicker, because Ethernet just doesn't compare to RDMA typically. SmartNICs do. Meaning that you can create that fabric, that storage fabric, you could make that a lot cheaper because Ethernet is a lot cheaper than RDMA. But you need to get the performance straight, right? So if the SmartNIC really delivers on that performance and does the equivalent of the direct attached storage or the RDMA storage, that would pretty much make it a lot cheaper to create those storage fabrics. That's why I called that out, but I do think that needs a lot of development before we can actually get there, and a lot of benchmarking and a lot of
sure, a lot of incumbent players.
Yeah. And by the way, AWS is also already doing that. Their storage is offloaded to their SmartNICs already. So there is a use case.
Obviously, if we see the large hyperscalers, as you brought up before, if this is what they're betting a key piece of their infrastructure for, is the SmartNICs and all of the things that it facilitates, we can definitely see that coming to fruition down here to the enterprise and what we're trying to do with Project Monterey.
I would say 100%, yeah.
Nice. All right, we are coming up on the top of the hour. We have a handful of minutes left here. So the first thing I do want to do a shout out is on your blog. You have Learn More. You have some great references out there to go, click through. So go to your blog. What's the blog URL again?
That's the lostdomain.org without the D. So just lostdomain.org.
All right, lostdomain.org. Go there, look at the article. You've got links that go to the Project Monterey and the announcements. You have a link to the Pensando documents, which is also good. So fairly comprehensive to go learn a little bit more about what's actually happening here, right? So that's good. Did they talk about availability on any of this? When we talk about a project, I think Fling. I talk about we're going to see it 3 years from now. Is VMware talking about allowing people to play with any of this yet?
Not yet, as far as I know. I'm trying to get access myself, and I work for VMware, so you can imagine how it is for people outside. But I do know that once a company like VMware announces something like this, they need to provide results into not too distant future. So I would expect maybe by the end of this year or something that they will be in private beta. At least that's my hope. And that we could maybe do next year VMworld, do a big announcement. But I'm just guessing there. But
sure. All right. So the next question I have for you is hardware vendors like HP, Dell, and others. Do you see them getting into this game as well? Right. So when I'm buying systems, I can get a SmartNIC integrated into the platform itself.
I think so, but primarily the price has to come down before they actually start jumping on board, because like servers is a bare minimum margin company or a market, right? So they don't make a lot of money based on the actual equipment and things. So if you put in a SmartNIC, the price of a server would maybe triple in price. So I don't think that will happen right now. It needs to come down in price, and then, I mean, at some point you will just be able to buy a Dell SmartNIC, I would assume.
Yeah, that.
Or a rebranded Dell SmartNIC, right? Sure, where they take base firmware and just like what they do with an HBA or whatnot. But to bring that cost down and the acceptability, yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah. All right. That's a good summary of what you got going. I don't know if I have other questions on this, Matt. Don't know if you have anything else that comes in your head. Then
I do. It's an aside, but the last time we had Martijn on it, that we had talked about the Network Insight Cookbook and wanted to know how any updates are coming along. Can we expect version 2? What's the latest there?
I thought that was a SaaS book, where he was constantly updating it, and you just went and read it online. I thought that was how that worked these days.
Yeah, that was the idea, and it's still coming along. Don't get me wrong. I had originally set myself on a goal of updating it every 6 months at least, and then adding a couple chapters on new use cases that Veer and I was doing. I'm about halfway with that update right now, so I think I'll need another month or 2 before I can actually push that release. I've kind of scaled down on the just pushing an update every single month, because I want to make it a coherent story, and I want to make it like relate to the rest of the book. So yeah, if you're looking for it, there's going to be a digital update by let's say April for at least. Yeah.
In the meantime, you can go get it on lostdomain.org right now, right? You can just go go purchase it and check it out.
Yeah. There's the digital form. I use LeanPub as my publishing platform, and that basically allows me to push new content whenever. There's also a physical version on Amazon, but honestly, if you want to get the updates, just go with LeanPub and save a couple of trees, maybe.
Excellent.
I had mentioned it at the top of the hour, just out of pure curiosity, and I'm a great user, very appreciative of it here. The Stream Deck plugin. What made you come up with that for Zoom? I think it's, if you look, if for those that aren't familiar with the platform, so Stream Deck it's It's a product made by Elgato. There's various different sizes of it. It's OLED programmable function keys. It's really turned into its own ecosystem. There's so many different plugins and key codes and macros that you can run for various different devices and things like OSB and whatnot. But Martijn has written a plugin that allows your status to be switched very quickly within Zoom, regardless of what Zoom window you have open. And it's one of the most popular downloads available for Stream Deck. So what's a little bit of background there as we have 5 minutes here and we're trying to finish up?
Yeah, that was actually kind of. So I'm an automation nut. That's one. I don't like to do things twice, or if I do have to do it twice, I need to be able to do it very quickly by just adding one button or whatever. So Joe Backley, the EMEA CTO for VMware, put me on a Stream Deck in order to do some things with just switching lights on and off, my mute button, the audio, all of that. But I was also spending, I don't know, maybe 6 hours a day in Zoom or something. This was pandemic height. And I was getting very annoyed by having to find the Zoom window and then clicking mute and being able to talk and then missing the opportunity to talk. Because of course you're multitasking, right? I mean, you're not just paying attention to the Zoom. No, you're doing other things. So I looked into that and I saw that they had a pretty simple SDK, and you were able to automate the Zoom window with like Apple scripts as well, just by simulating to press a button on the Zoom client. And kind of one thing led to another. So I was bored for an evening or something, and I had a working prototype. And it just helps me so much. So my secret is I just build stuff for myself, and other people seem to like it as well. Yeah, it's amazing. I'm almost past the 25,000 downloads now on the Elgato App Store. I think it's just exploded. This was like a cool thing to do, but yeah, kind of
really turned into something. And I'm sure a lot of us are out there. Obviously, 25,000 some that use it every day. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That is Martijn number 8. Let alone the vExpert app and all the stuff you do with the vExpert program as well. It's like, I don't know, crazy.
Yeah, that's Martijn 5.
Yeah, exactly. All right, with that, Matt, we'll do a V-barbecue report here in a second because I heard something about a brisket. But Martijn, thanks a lot for coming on the show. As always, it's good to see you, and thanks for all the work you do in the V community and all the stuff that you're doing. It's fun, super cool. I'm glad they got your power back up. I mean, the European stock market fell by 1% because they heard all 20 Martijns were out of power, which is the one way to shut this guy up and not let him do anything is take away his power. So I'm glad you're plugged in. Thanks for coming on the show, Matt. The barbecue report. Were you serious? You put a brisket on, or were you just saying that?
I did. I put a brisket on. It's on right now. It smells absolutely V-delicious in the house. I can't wait to dive in. I've changed the rub around a little this time, so we'll see how this progresses, but I can't wait.
I'm on my annual January no barbecue, no food. Every year I kind of do this at the beginning of the year. I go, wait, I put on another 10 pounds. This can't be happening. So like for January, I basically fast, right? You eat a little salad and
trim it on map.
Exactly. And just and then go for January and maybe into February until I drop 40 pounds or 30 pounds, and then I do it again. So no V barbecue for me this in January. Some people do no alcohol in January. I do no food in January, no barbecue in January. But I'll be thinking of you, Matt, while you're tearing into that brisket.
I'll send pictures.
Perfect. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for coming on a Friday. Appreciate it. As always, great show. I learned some stuff. We'll be back again next week with a new technical guest. And until then, have a great weekend. See you again.